The Senate will come to order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Cook, Quorum, Court, Crowder, Danielson, Donovan, Benberg, Fields, Foote, Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hill,
Absent.
Heisey, Holbert, Lee, Lundeen, Marble, Moreno, Pedersen,
Excused.
Priola, Rankin, Rodriguez, Scott, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story,
Excused.
Tate, Todd, Williams, Winter, Woodward, Zenzinger, Hill, Mr. President.
Here. With Mr. Carpenter, please add Senator Pedersen to the roll call. With 34 present, 0 absent, and 1 excused, we have a quorum. Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we suspend Senate Rule 1B to allow a person other than a senator to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. We will suspend Senate Rule 1B. Members, will you please stand so that we may join Harper? Harper, come join us, please. Harper Pagnozzi, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning. Harper is a third grader at Prospect Valley Elementary School. Harper, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members, please remain standing as we are pleased to have a musical interlude this morning from the Sound of the Rockies, which is Colorado's premier men's a cappella group, and Barber Chorus joining us up here. With more than 80 members of all ages, the group is regarded as one of the 4 best barbershop choruses in the world. They are here to sing this morning the Star-Spangled Banner. Sound of the Rockies, thank you so much for joining us here today. Mr. Carpenter, please add Senator Story to the roll call. Approval of the journal. Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the journal on Monday, February 4th, 2019 be dispensed with and that the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. Is there any objection? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Committee reports.
February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 43, be amended as follows. As submitted before the Committee of the Whole, the favorable recommendation. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 111, be referred to the Committee of the Whole, the favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 112, be referred to the Committee of the Whole, the favorable recommendation. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 113, be referred to the Committee of the Whole, the favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 114, be referred to the Committee of the Whole, the favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations after consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 115, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation or recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 116, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and with a recommendation to be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 117, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation or recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 118, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's the Committee records following. Senate Bill 119, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 120, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 121, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 122, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 123, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 124, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 125, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation or recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 126, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation to be placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 127, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 5th, 2019, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 128, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 4th, 2019, Committee on Judiciary. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 86, be amended as follows. As amended, be referred to Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation. February 4th, 2019, Committee on State, Veterans, and Military Affairs. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 89 be postponed indefinitely. February 4th, 2019, Committee on State, Veterans, and Military Affairs. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends the following. Senate Bill 87 be postponed indefinitely. February 4th, 2019, Committee on State, Veterans, and Military Affairs. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 91 be amended as follows. As amended, be referred to Committee on the Whole with a favorable recommendation. February 4th, 2019, Committee on Business, Labor, and Technology. After consideration of the Mayor's Committee records following. Senate Bill 79 be amended as follows. As submitted, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation and recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar.
Senate Services.
Correctly printed. Senate Bill 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123, 124, 125, 126, 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, and 132. Correctly engrossed, Senate Bill 57, 68, and 69. Senate Joint Resolution 4. Correctly revised, House Bill 1015, House Joint Resolution 1005, 1007, 1008, 1009, and 1010. Correctly enrolled, Senate Joint Resolution 3.
I'll go to the bathroom.
Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title of the bills, the title to the bill on the consent calendar.
Senate Bill 69 by Senator Lundin, Representative Wilson Bunteo, concerning non-public schools authority to operate certain teacher development programs.
Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the passage of the bill on the third reading of bills consent calendar, which includes Senate Bill 69.
Is there any discussion on on the bill on the third reading consent calendar? Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 69 is passed. Co-sponsors. Minority Leader, Senators Bridges, Winter, Cook, Marble, Quorum, Crowder, Heisey, Sonnenberg, Todd, Lee, Priola, Woodward, Rankin, Scott, Gardner, Tate, Smallwood, Zenzinger. Fields. Clarification, Senator Hill, were you raising your hand prior? Senator Hill. Please add the president. Third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 068.
Senate Bill 68 by Senators Zenzinger and Tate, and Representative Weissman, concerning expanded disclosure about electioneering communications.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 68 on third reading and ask for an aye vote.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to briefly make some mention of this potential legislation. I know some of us received a memo kind of going through what would be a general First Amendment concern with this policy area. And I want to say that first of all, I want to thank that organization for looking at this bill and providing that opinion. It's very important that we're vigilant on First Amendment concerns when you look at college campuses now putting in speech codes and all kinds of organizations, shutting down the free discourse, where really free speech is only for speech that people agree with versus all free speech. So it's an area that I think we should all take very seriously, and in conjunction with the First Amendment and election law, we have a lot of statutes related to transparency in terms of donations and what committees are doing. And again, that should also be an area of vigilance, but it should also be an area of, I should say, restraint. I think it's okay for, this is just expressing my opinion, if I were going to be running next year, I would like to know in July of 2020 who is out there saying what a bad guy Jack Tate is. I'd like to know that. And if it were my colleague from Boulder, I'd like to know that too. He might be first on my list of suspicion, by the way. But at the same time, some of those transparency laws can be abused, where bullies will go and hound and dox donors to political committees. And that's basically its own attack on free speech by trying to go after people who are trying to express their own opinion. This bill itself just takes what we have in statute today regarding transparency of election communications and extends the time period to reflect today's elections. When we originally had legislation in place, The laws reflected the notion that we had kind of two elections separately distinct, where after the primary election there'd be a pause and then there'd be a general election. Well, I think we can see now that in some ways electioneering never stops, and that a general election starts the day after a primary election is over. And this bill just basically reflects that. As we have moved the primary election forward in the calendar to June from originally the end of August. One thing I will say, though, if you strongly believe that all this area of law regulating election communications is unconstitutional, then this bill is not for you, because it doesn't really go against that or really enhance it or fix it or do anything. If you fundamentally believe this area of law is unconstitutional, then you should vote no on this bill in your conscience of acting here in the Senate, where you get to say what the Constitution means as well. And so I just wanted to clarify that and indulge your time, since I was indisposed yesterday during second reading. Thank you.
Senator Zenzinger.
And colleagues, I just want to say a few brief remarks about the bill as well. What we are requiring here is that entities that are doing electioneering need to affix a paid for by on their electioneering during the months of July and August. We are closing up a loophole that was inadvertently created when we moved our primary from August to June. And so I think that, love it or hate it, Citizens United was very clear about the rules around disclosure. And so because of that, we are very pleased to be able to move this bill forward, and we ask for an aye vote.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, our rules of debate allowing 10 minutes at each time at the podium and 20 minutes total essentially are inadequate to address the infirmities of this bill. And with respect to my colleagues, I know that it is well-intentioned, but I will be a no, because I believe that core political speech of all things is protected and should be protected by the First Amendment. Now, when the bill was being drafted and introduced, one of the sponsors indicated to me that what the bill was doing was taking care of a loophole that existed in the law because we had changed the date of our primary. Now, the fact of the matter is there was always a time between the primary election and the general election when one could engage in communication that unambiguously referred to a candidate, because that's the test, without engaging in electioneering communication, which was another test. As I said, 20 minutes is inadequate for this discussion. So there was always a period of time. Well, why was that? Why was it 30 days before the primary and 60 days before the general? Well, really that language comes from the McCain-Feingold Act, which had survived judicial challenge. But the proponents say transparency, transparency. Well, first of all, members, I'm going to say something that may astound all of you. You have an absolute constitutional right to engage in anonymous political speech. Let me say that again. You have an absolute First Amendment right to engage in anonymous political speech. So, what happens and how is it that your absolute right to engage in anonymous political speech, maybe you want to be anonymous because you don't want to be held up to public ridicule because you're a private citizen and you have a view, but you don't want to be outed some way, but you do want your view to be known. It happens, and the courts have recognized that. So why are there restrictions? Why are there rules to disclose? Well, the Supreme Court has held that there is perhaps a danger of actual or perceived corruption in political spending, and therefore we need some transparency. So what is absolutely protected is permitted to be infringed, and it is an infringement, but a permissible infringement, permitted because of the potential for corruption. Now, this electioneering communication requirement, it doesn't apply to people's campaigns. And it doesn't apply to parties because they engage in acts of express advocacy being vote for or vote against. No, electioneering communications are about other groups, and the limitation on time was about the fact that there are lots and lots of communications about people in the political world, many of them office holders running for re-election or intending to run for re-election. There are many communications about them, for them, against them, and the things that they view that unambiguously refer to them. And so McCain-Feingold limited this to 30 days before and primary and 60 days before general. But we have to fill this loophole now because we moved our primary. Well, it doesn't change the fact that you have a First Amendment right to refer to people who happen to be candidates for office. Let me give you an example. Let's say that after a primary, say I choose to run in 2020, I'm making that decision at the moment. And in 2020, as a member of the Colorado State Senate in June, after the primary, heaven forbid this happens, but it could happen, that the governor calls a special session to deal with a very important issue. Well, it turns out that if anyone wants to have a communication delivered by newspaper or broadcast saying, call Bob Gardner and tell him vote for or against the issue in that special session, that will suddenly be an electioneering communication, even though it's about the special session. I submit to you, colleagues, that is unconstitutional. I could speak to this for another hour or so, but let me conclude by saying when one engages in political speech, core political speech, the First Amendment, free speech protection, is at its zenith. It is at its highest. And to step in and to say, no, between the primary and the general, for no purpose whatsoever can you engage in communications that refer to a candidate without reporting it to the world, I believe it is unconstitutional. It is certainly an infringement. I ask for a no vote.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, my colleague from Colorado Springs. I am not a small country lawyer, but I do have a couple of important arguments that speak to some of the points that were just made. The main problem is that there is a fundamental difference between issues-based advocacy and candidates. So when it comes to issues-based candidacy or issues-based advocacy, as explained in the example, the very appropriate example that was brought forward with regard to a special session, there actually is already case law that authorizes anonymous speech for issues-based advocacy. That case law is McIntyre versus Ohio. There are other cases as well that say that that is perfectly acceptable, that if we were to be in a special session and some organization wanted to send out more than $1,000 in electioneering communication about an issue that we are discussing or about our various positions on that issue, that is perfectly acceptable. However, the First Amendment approach to electioneering activity for candidates is embodied in Citizens United is different than for issues-based advocacy. When it comes to candidates, there is actually a compelling government interest for disclosure, as outlined in Citizens United. In the electioneering context, the Supreme Court has clearly stated, and most recently on page 914 of the Supreme Court Reporter from that decision, that the First Amendment allows the imposition of disclosure requirements to advance the, quote, governmental interest in providing the electorate with information about the sources of election-related spending. Furthermore, as outlined on page 914 of Citizens United, the disclosure needs to be real and not protected by an unforeseen loophole. The argument about extending a window and that it must be kept narrow is not ever mentioned specifically in Citizens United, but in fact quite the opposite. They are very, very clear that if an inadvertent loophole creates a window where the disclosure is not happening for candidates, we are undermining the purpose of the disclosure as outlined in Citizens United, and that's because the court upheld these requirements in order for public discourse by sponsors of advertisements. So I recognize that this may be uncomfortable for several folks with regard to the First Amendment, but I believe we are covered in this case because this bill does not apply to issues-based advocacy, only candidates. Thank you.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, let me just say to my colleague from Jefferson County, it's not uncomfortable for me, it outrages me. And as I listen to the argument in favor of this bill as it addresses issue advocacy, if issue advocacy is protected, and it is, electioneering communication ought not be. Take my example once again of a special session in June after the primary but before the general, when an issue would come before the General Assembly, and perhaps I'm a candidate for re-election in 2020, and there are people out there that think I have a wrong-headed notion about the issue in the General Assembly. I know that would be astounding to my friends on the other side of the aisle, that I would have a wrong-headed notion. But citizens would want to communicate and say, vote against Senator Gardner's bill in the special session because his bill is a bad idea. Senator Gardner's bill is a wrong idea. Guess what? That issue advocacy, because they keep saying it's Senator Gardner's bill, it's the Gardner bill, that's suddenly an electioneering communication subject to regulation by your government. Let me just say once again, I am limited to speaking to you twice and for 10 minutes each. I cannot do justice to a topic that is printed on page 900 and something, and then further in the Supreme Court Reporter. Let me just say, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law, and the 14th Amendment incorporates that for the states. This is an infringement. It is a regulation of speech. It is a regulation upon citizens' rights to communicate about issues. The court has been clear that in cases where there's perceived corruption, dangers of that corruption, that we can regulate and force disclosure. But these communications are not campaign communications, they are not party communications, they are communications by citizens who join together to communicate and to say, Bob Gardner's got the wrong idea about something. They should not be subject to the regulation of their speech by the government. Think about that. What we are talking about is the regulation of speech by the government. You say, no, we don't stop them from speaking. Well, having to report your speech and how much you spent on the speech and where you made the speech. And you know, I know this will come as a surprise to you, but I've been accused of various things in electioneering communications myself. Scurrilous things have been said about me. I was accused of being a liberal in an electioneering communication. But the fact of the matter is, it is what I accept to accept living in a free society with free speech. And I might wonder who called me a liberal, but I pretty much know. And they might spend $100,000 doing it, and I pretty much know where it came from. But I don't need to know where it came from to stand up and say, I'm not a liberal, just ask my friends on the other side of the aisle. I ask for a no vote.
Seeing Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yeah, maybe 10 minutes doesn't do justice. I completely agree with that. Nothing like a good bill here we have today to wake the sleeping bear of bigger issues. But ultimately, this bill is about one thing, is that an advertisement, a communication that on August 16th would say, you know, Jack Bad paid for by Spacely Sprockets and Cogswell Cogs Association. 2 days earlier, it doesn't have to say that, even though it's the same piece of communication. So let's just remember, all we're doing is extending a time period by which we're doing something already. And if we feel, as a matter of public policy, we should get rid of all of it, and I find my colleagues' arguments persuasive in looking at that, I'm willing to take some strong consideration. I have a lot of concerns about how speech is manhandled. But remember, we're just talking about something we're doing we're doing right now. And not having an artificial deadline by which, or artificial time point where what we do changes. So I urge an aye vote, but I would refer my colleagues here to some of the comments I made earlier here this morning. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 068. Are there any no votes? Minority Leader. Senators Marble, Cook, Woodward, Gardner, Rankin, Sonnenberg, Lundin, Crowder, Hill, Smallwood, Scott. With a vote of 23 ayes, 12 no votes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 068 is passed. Co-sponsors. Majority Leader, Senators Gonzalez, Danielson, Winter, Rodriguez, Bridges, Fields, Court, Foote, Donovan, Todd, Janal, Pedersen, Lee, Williams. Please add the President. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 057.
Senate Bill 57 by Senators Story and Finberg and Representative McCluskey concerning information relating to employee eligibility for student loan repayment programs.
Majority Leader. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 57 on third reading and final passage and ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 57? Seeing none, the motion before us is the passage of Senate Bill 57. Senator Hill.
Thanks, Mr. President and colleagues. I apologize. I thought the sponsors were going to speak briefly. So very briefly, I want to explain why I'm just not comfortable with this bill. We could have a long discussion about the problems with student loan debt. It's $1.5 trillion in America right now, and our federal government is certainly complicit in many cases of pushing loans in cases in 4 degrees that candidly they have no right doing. If they were a private entity, indeed, I think we would bring them up on consumer protection issues. But this bill really is designed to address the telling our constituents about loan repayment option programs from the federal government, or loan forgiveness programs from the federal government. And colleagues, I mean, we heard in committee, we heard from one lady who said she was in support of the bill, but actually testified, and I think it was a kind of a heartbreaking story about how in order to qualify for these programs, they actually forced her into a higher interest rate program in the first place. And she was actually worse off for going through the program than she was beforehand. Again and again and again, we see these government efforts to try to address a problem that government has helped create. And I think we're going down the wrong path by saying, well, let's use another government mandate to solve a government program that government has helped create. And so I mean, the bill does not have a fiscal note. I'm not convinced the bill will change that much one way or the other, but at some point I think it's time for us to collectively, left side of the aisle, right side of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, admit that this is a crisis that we in part hold some responsibility for. And until we can own up to our constituents that government isn't going to solve this problem, it hasn't solved this problem, I think we are doing ourselves and our constituents a disservice by continuing to perpetuate the problem, and I fear that's what this bill does.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad the senator from El Paso County agrees that we need to do a whole lot more to address the student debt crisis in America right now. I agree this bill is not enough. This bill is not going to solve the problem. I fundamentally disagree that it perpetuates the problem, though. This informs people simply of a program that already exists, but our federal government is not telling them about. The woman that testified in committee on this bill that was mentioned, she was in support of the bill because if she knew about the program and enrolled in it and prepared for it much earlier in her life, she would have saved herself a lot of money. That's what this bill is about, is informing people of their options so they can enroll at the right time so that they can save a lot of money over the long run. This is, again, a program that exists. This is just informing government employees, local city employees, teachers, people that work in our communities that qualify for these programs but just simply don't know about them. This would essentially say that in a pay stub or an email that is sent to employees from HR that hey, there's this program that exists and you're probably eligible, maybe you should look into it, click here. That's what this bill does. We can call it a government mandate because that sounds bad, but this is a government mandate on the government. This is just us saying what we will do to make sure we are treating our employees correctly that work for the government or work for our school districts or work for our local city governments.
Seeing no further discussion on Senate Bill 057, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 57. Are there any no votes? Mr. Minority Leader, Senators Sonnenberg, Heisey, Crowder, Cook, Hill, Marble, Gardner, Rankin, Scott. With a vote of 25 ayes, 10 no votes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 57 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Lee, Danielson, Gonzalez, Winter, Bridges, Fields, Janal, Court, Priola, Donovan, Williams, Rodriguez, Todd, Zenzinger, Pedersen. Please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to House Bill 1015.
House Bill 1015 by Representative Arn Senator Janal concerning the recreation of the Colorado Water Institute.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1015 on third reading and ask for an aye vote.
Is there any discussion on House Bill 1015? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of House Bill 1015. Are there any no votes? Senators Hill, Marble, Mr. Minority Leader, Senator Smallwood, Gardner, with a vote of 30 ayes, 5 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, House Bill 1015 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Moreno, Janal, Lee, Court, Fenberg, Donovan, Fields, Gonzalez, Todd, Story, Bridges, Winter, Rodriguez. Please add the president. General orders, second reading of bills. Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, general calendar.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those no. The ayes have it. And the motion is adopted. And the Senate will resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for considerations of general orders, second reading of bills, and Senator Foote will take the chair.
The committee will come to order, and the code rule is relaxed. Mr. Carpenter, can you please read the bills on the calendar?
Senate Bill 31 by Senator Gardner and Representative Leontine and Liston concerning the composition of the Child Welfare Allocations Committee.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 31.
To the bill, Senator
Thank
Gardner.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this bill, to which I will have an amendment in a moment, increases the number of members on the Child Welfare Allocation Committee that are appointed by the county commissioners. Now, this, as you might have gathered from its being on the calendar for several days, had some discussion around how we were going to add these members. We are going to add by amendment, and at this time I would ask that the amendment be read.
Thank you. Senator Gardner has tendered L001. Mr. Carpenter, please read the amendment.
Amendment L001, Senate Bill 31 by
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L001. L001 adds 2 members to the committee. They are going to be non-voting members. So now we will have a Child Welfare Allocation Committee where the prior 2 county representatives are appointed by their respective commissioners. And by statute, it is the 2 counties with the largest caseloads, currently El Paso County and Denver County, City and County of Denver. The 2 non-voting members will be essentially child welfare experts appointed by the department to ensure that we're discussing the appropriate allocation and so forth. So I ask for an aye vote on L01.
Senator Court.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you note from seeing the bill, I am not the co-prime, but I am a co-sponsor because, as my colleague from El Paso County noted, the two counties with the heaviest caseload are El Paso and Denver. And so we both want to see this bill pass because it is important for our respective constituencies. Thank you.
To the amendment, Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of the amendment and thank my colleague from Colorado Springs for bringing it. I think it's important to have subject matter experts on this committee. This will allow for that, and so I encourage your support for the amendment.
Senator Zinzinger.
Colleagues, I too am in support of this amendment. I think it makes the bill stronger, and I urge an aye vote.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you. I renew my request for an aye vote, and in doing so, I want to recognize both the Department of Human Services and CCI for their hard work to kind of reach this compromise, and thank them and ask for an aye vote on the amendment.
Is there further discussion on L001? Seeing none, the question before the body is the adoption of L001 to Senate Bill 31. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. L001 is adopted. To the bill, Senator Gardner.
At this point, it's a great bill. We ask for an aye vote.
Further discussion on Senate Bill 31. Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 31. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Senate Bill 31 is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
Seeing no objection, the committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come back to order. Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has met and one bill was under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, committee begs lead reports that are considered the following text bills being second reading thereof makes the following recommendation on Senate Bill 31 as amended passing read order gross place calendar for the reading of final passage.
Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the report.
The motion before the body is adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 031 as amended passed on second reading and ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Signing of bills.
The President has signed Senate General Resolution 4.
Message from the House.
The House has passed the third reading and returns herewith Senate Bill 2858. The House has passed the third reading and transmitted revised statutes House Bill 1066, 1034 minutes printed in the House Journal February 5th, 2019.
Announcements. Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, today we have some very special guests in the building because we are celebrating the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. And so I have a tribute here that I would like to read in honor of this day, convened on the first regular session of the 72nd General Assembly. We hereby extend our heartiest congratulations and commendation to the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. The members of the Colorado Senate commend the SCFD for more than 30 years of connecting the public through the arts, culture, and scientific experiences. Your steadfast support and mission to ensure unparalleled levels of access for Colorado residents, offering thousands of free and discounted activities each year, is a model of civic leadership and community impact. With the SCFD as their foundation, the organizations providing cultural access in the region are the envy of communities across the nation. With an emphasis on culture for all, the SCFD continues to be a shining example of how the things that unite us are far greater than those that divide us. This was on request of Senator Zenzinger on this 5th day of February 2019. And we have a couple of folks that are here representing the SCFD Board of Directors and various organizations that are a part of this fabulous organization. If you all wouldn't mind standing for us today. As the tribute said, the district has expanded access to art, culture, and scientific experiences in the 7-county Denver metro area, and also for the entire state of Colorado. If you wonder about this access, you only need to be reminded that annually, nearly 6 million people benefit from the free days at organizations funded by the district, an opportunity that simply wouldn't exist without the SCFD. Voters established this district back in 1988, and they have 3 additional times voted to keep the district going, which is a true testament to the value that this district provides to our communities and individual lives. This year, the district will fund nearly 300 organizations that enrich our lives, educate our children, and engage our communities. These organizations include our largest cultural organizations in the state, and even some mid-sized organizations like the Arvada Center, which is a favorite of mine. The vast majority of the organizations funded by the district are smaller local efforts funded at the county level, where resident committees appointed by county commissioners make the decisions about their community's cultural future through the organizations that they select to support. There are a number of other talking points that I could go over, but I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you do. It is a great honor for us to be able to recognize you today. Again, we want to give a shout out to the Sound of the Rockies, who performed our national anthem this morning, and Harper Pagnosi, who did our Pledge of Allegiance. And following this, the governor will be doing a tribute at 10 a.m. Downstairs. He'll actually be reading a proclamation, so perhaps you all can join us. And thank you very much for being here.
Senator Court.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance Committee, we are rearranging our schedule slightly this afternoon. Senator Rodriguez will be first, Senator Hill second, and then we're still figuring out timing for whether the treasurer or the para people will go first or second, but we will be hearing from both of them this afternoon. So 2 o'clock, Senator Rodriguez, Senator Hill, and then the treasurer and para. Thank you.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President. And the Legislative Caucus on Aging will meet tomorrow from 7:30 in the morning till 8:45 in room 107, and they're going to highlight the 2018 Strategic Action Plan. So anyone interested, please come 7:30 to 8:45, room 107 tomorrow, the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. And I just want to make an announcement for the Senate Local Government Committee. That will be meeting today at 2 p.m. in SCR 354. We're going to be hearing 3 bills: Senate Bill 47, Senate Bill 19, and House Bill 1011. Thanks.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. A quick announcement that tonight the Realtors are cordially inviting us to join them at the Brown Palace. And this is an opportunity to interact with some of our realtors that are really making a big difference in affordable housing and looking at different housing options. So go at this evening, Brown Palace, from 4:15 to 6 p.m. if you are available. And then also, final reminder that tomorrow morning, unless we are totally snowed out, 7:30 a.m., joint education to join with our State Board of Education in room 271, and you are all cordially invited to join us. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I have two announcements. This evening, Retail Council's annual legislative reception will be at the U Club, 5:15. And also, today is Faithful Tuesday, is a diverse coalition of leaders, organizations, and community members who are committed to adding a deeper moral dimension to the public policy process in Colorado. Their work will forward unifying narrative, uplifting our common faith, call to build human dignity in our state, and help advance dialogue on issues of moral, economy, equity, and eradication of racism. They're meeting at noon for lunch down in the South Rotunda, so I hope you can attend.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now that everyone's gone, I'll make an announcement that the Technology Caucus is meeting Thursday at noon, reminder up in room 357. And I'll make a more timely announcement tomorrow. Thank you.
Message from the Rowiser.
We herewith transmit without comment as amended House Bill 1034 and 1066.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate recess until 2 p.m. today.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will be recessed until 1400 today.